welcome back to part 2 of this tutorial where we're taking a look behind the scenes of this little promo edit that I did for GIGGS. In part 1, I ran you through the first part of it, we went through After Effects, and now in part 2 we're going to check out the Cinema 4D, we're going to talk about the 3D animation that I've done, and then I'm going to show you how I did this sort of beginning and the end and made this into a perfect loop as well. Alright, let's get on with it. Right, so I've got Cinema 4D open now. Now I appreciate a lot of people probably don't have access to Cinema 4D, so I'm just going to rattle through this bit quite quickly, just so you can see, kind of vaguely speaking, what I've actually done to make this work. This animation is made up of 2 different parts. The first part is the Scrumpling Effect that you can see going on here. And the way that I did that is I just created a simple plane, and then I turned it into a soft body using a soft body tag up here. And then I created this sphere that's actually invisible at the moment, so I'll turn it on, and then I used the sphere as a kind of collider body, and I had the plane colliding with the sphere and the sphere getting smaller, which ended up scrumpling up the plane into this nice little ball. So you can see here, this is what's going on. The sphere is getting smaller and it's scrunching up the piece of paper as it gets smaller. So that's just a nice little soft body animation using a soft body dynamics tag. So once I'd done the simulation, I basically baked the dynamics and I created this as a single solid object. And then what I did is I just rotated it. I keyframed the rotation to make it feel like it was spinning in the air when he throws it. So then I set up a camera looking straight down at the piece of paper. You'll notice that the animation plays in reverse, and that's just because I couldn't find a way of simulating the unfolding movement. It was only really going to be possible for me to do it as a thing that was getting scrumpled up rather than a thing that was getting unscrumpled. Now I also created the moment where it bashes into the camera, and I did that just by keyframing the zoom. So if we scrub through like this, you can see it zooms in, bosh, hits the camera, and then shoots back again. If we jump into the curves for that, so you can see what that zoom looks like. So this is the movement, so it's slowly getting towards the camera, boom, and bounces off nice and quick, which I thought was a kind of natural way for it to hit the camera and bounce off. And that's pretty much it for the animation. It's not a very complicated animation. What I didn't do is I didn't try and replicate the throw in Cinema 4D because I knew that I could just track this ball in to be in the right place in the After Effects composition, and it was easier if my camera pretty much stayed static in Cinema 4D. So the next thing to do was to do a bit of lighting and a bit of texturing. So you can see these 2 panels up here, these are my lights. And what I wanted, because the ball was flying through space and moving past a lot of different lights, I wanted the lighting to be constantly changing. So I set up these 2 lights here, light 1 and light 2, and I just set them to spin around like this, which would mean they're going to cast random shadows and make the lighting change constantly on the ball of paper as it flew. But actually most of the lighting will come from this sky object here. So let me just turn on scene by camera so you can actually see it. Now this layer is actually an HDRI map of the real studio that I captured while we were there. So I'm just trying to navigate around so you can see it. It's not very high res, which is unfortunate, but these are, I think that's me there. So this is the real studio that we actually shot the thing in. I got a 360 image using my Insta360 camera, and I've used that to create an environment map. And Cinema 4D takes the lighting from this environment and it uses this to bounce rays around and light this virtual scene that we've created. The materials I used were pretty simple. Let me just jump into the GIGGS material. So obviously got the image as a texture here, that's the main thing. And then just a bit of a bump map as well. So I just threw in this little noise shader here. Luca was the setting that I used. I'm not sure why, but it seemed to me like the most paper-like texture. So you can see some of these kind of subtle bumps that makes it feel a bit more like real paper rather than just completely flat and clean. And I've got a little bit of reflectance as well, just so it's picking up some of the light, making it seem a little bit more natural and a bit more glossy. So that is it for the Cinema 4D. So I threw that onto render and then I brought it back into After Effects. So we're back in After Effects now. I'm just going to show you how I put the Cinema 4D animated ball of paper in. So this is my render. This is what I got out of Cinema 4D. And then you can see just by animating the position and the scale, I've made it come from back there all the way to the middle of the screen, which is where we wanted it to end up. And then I just worked out roughly what I thought a good throw would look like to make this work. And then to make it more interesting, again, I've used Trapco Particular to create these sparks that you can see flying out of the ball. Nice glowing sparks there. And we've got our electricity flash happening as well. So that's just the same lightning ball layer that we've already seen, tracked on top of the ball, and then we've got it flickering on and off. So you can see if I just play it by itself, it looks a little bit like this. And then when the ball actually hits the camera, I used this smoke texture. And this is just a stock thing that I found probably on Envato Elements. It's a nice little smoke ring puff like that, which I just thought was the perfect kind of impact. So when you put that together, you end up with something that looks like this. Now, on that moment of impact, I've also added a bit of fake camera shake. You can see here the camera seems to wobble and shake around. And again, this is another Red Giant plugin that I've used. The plugin is called Universe Camera Shake, and it's part of the Red Giant Universe thing. And you can basically just use this to create a bit of fake camera shake, which is really useful for this kind of impact. And then the other thing you might notice are these cool red, green, blue chromatic waves that seem to be coming out of the explosion as well. And the way that I've done that is by using an effect called Chromatic Displacement. And this is something that I love using. You can create this really cool color-based displacement map using a certain input layer. So what I've used as an input for this is an effect called radio waves. So I've created these radio waves that come out of the explosion like that. And this is just a standard stock After Effects expression. Center it up and have them following the explosion. And let's just zoom in on that section. So you can see it's now using these radio waves, if I make it a little bit more clear, as this cool chromatic displacement. I didn't want it to be quite so obvious, so I made it a lot softer. But it's a really cool effect. And if you want to learn a bit more about this, then also watch my Bugsy Malone tutorial. I go into quite a lot of depth about the chromatic displacement effect there. So this is that explosion and that impact that we created. And you can see with all those things combined, with the puff of smoke, with the camera shake, and with the chromatic displacement, you end up with this really cool, energetic explosion. So for this final part of the shot, after the paper has filled the screen, what it does is it scrumples up again, and then it falls to the ground, creates this other explosion, little fireball, and then we pan up again and we're back at the start. This was just another little Cinema 4D animation that I created in exactly the same way. And then what I did with the Cinema 4D animation is I just blended it into a real shot that we got of us dropping a piece of paper onto the ground. Let me just show you the raw footage. So this is the raw footage here. You can see dropping the piece of paper on the ground. Now, what I actually ended up doing is I ended up splicing together this paper dropping section with the introduction that we've already created. So this is actually two separate shots. So hidden as the camera pans up like this, we pan up into the beginning shot that we've already created. So I did that by just using another After Effects camera. You can see camera here. And I just created this virtual camera tilt like this. So tilts up by 45 degrees. And then I had to position the beginning shot in exactly the right place. But luckily I knew that because my camera was going to end at 45 degrees tilted up, I'd need this to be 45 degrees tilted down. I also put in a couple of black layers here, like in the center, to mask out the transition so you wouldn't really notice. But I think you'd buy it. I don't think you'd notice that's two separate shots. The whip pan up there works quite well. Now let me just talk you through some of the extra bits and pieces that I've applied to make this piece of paper look really, really cool. The main one is this ring of smoke effect. Let me just solo that. So this is a really cool texture that again I found online somewhere, and it's just perfect for this because the angle is exactly right. It just seems to work really well for the ball falling. And I've actually used that 3 times. So we've got 1, 2, 3 copies, and they're all just scaled up. This one 100, this is 160, and then this outside one is 260. And I've made the opacity a little bit duller just on the outside one, so it feels like it's fading off into the distance. And then as we've seen already, I've got the kind of lightning effects. This is my lightning ball that I told you how I made earlier. And that's just tracked onto the ball of paper again to make it fizzle out. And then finally we've got this nice ring of sparks as well. And again, this is just something that I found on Envato Elements. It's a cool little ring, a nice little spark explosion. So I put that there. And then this time I had to sort of rotate it a bit because the thing itself was flat. So I had to, because I've already got my 3D camera set up, it was pretty easy for me to position this in exactly the right place. So if I hit R, you can see I've rotated it by 60 degrees, and it makes it really feel like this thing is making a load of sparks as it falls down. Like I said, I had to play around a little bit with the position of this so it really matches up with the beginning of the whole thing, and it creates that perfectly seamless loop. It's quite easy to do that in After Effects because if you set your composition length like this, you can use the B for beginning and then N for end, I guess, and it will just create this little render region here, like we're rendering just this bit, and it will loop over and over. So what I did for this is I set my end point to be, something like that, and I set my beginning point to be something like that, counted the number of frames so it all matched up perfectly, and then you can just see what it's going to be like because the transition gets played automatically for you. So finally, what I did with the rendered thing is I brought it back into Premiere, and then this is where I added all the sound effects and did the final bit of sound design. We've got lightning, we've got some good hits, impacts, boom. Bits and pieces like this. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about the sound effects. I would just say that sound effects are so important. Every time that you see something on screen, every time that the ball's doing a little bit of lightning or it's flickering or it's crackling, you just want to make sure that you can hear that as well. Adding all these really nice deep bass rumbles, all of that kind of stuff. And that's how I brought this whole thing to life. If you listen to it without any music, I'll just play it through. You can hear that there's so much going on that it's still quite interesting and it's still quite good. And I think that should be the goal with any bit of sound design. You should be able to make your sound design so good and so engaging and so realistic that you don't even need any music, that it works without the music. All right, so that is it. I hope this was interesting. I hope you learned something. If you've got any questions or anything you want to ask, please do leave a comment or drop me a message. I'll try my best to answer it. If not, you know what to do. Hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you for the next video.